Okay, everyone, we're just going to give it like about probably less than a minute to make sure everybody can file in from the Zoom waiting room. Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone for coming today to the Joys and Challenges of Leadership in Higher Education. My name is Mary Ann Hunt, and I'm the Director of Lifelong Learning in the Office of Alumni Engagement Annual Giving. And I'm delighted and honored to be joining you for the sixth and the final event in this series of virtual conversations centered around leadership in higher education. This entire series has been recorded and will be available soon on the Tufts Alumni YouTube channel. We have been and still are navigating a time of significant global and national change, and these shifts are being felt on our campus and across our communities. So we designed this series to connect our alumni, parents, and campus community with the inspiring ways that our academic and faculty leaders are collaborating, innovating, and guiding us through these transformative times. Along the way, we've really got to know some of our key leaders better, hearing about their journeys and what inspires them. Today's event will be a conversation between Dayna Cunningham, Dean of the Jonathan M. Tisch School of Civic Life, and Christina Economos, Dean of the Friedman School of Nutrition, Science, and Policy, with Vice Provost Monroe France, Vice Provost for Institutional Inclusive Excellence. It will include many of your pre-submitted questions. We have a lot to cover today, and many of you have already heard about Monroe's background and credentials at the previous presentations. So to save time for the conversation, we'll be dropping his, Dayna Cunningham's, and Dean Economos' bios into the chat. I'd like to thank Dean Dayna Cunningham and Dean Christina Economos for being our featured guests today, and Vice Provost Monroe France for hosting the series. But now I'd like to extend a very special word of thanks to Monroe. When he proposed this idea for a series, we had 3 webinars in mind. It grew to 6, featuring 7 prominent campus leaders. Monroe, you have been such a great partner. Much has happened since we started this journey, and through it all, you were a joy to work with. You always responded to my nagging emails with grace and positivity. So thank you very much. And with that, I would like to have everyone extend a nice, warm virtual welcome from Monroe, France. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Marianne. It has been such a beautiful pleasure to be in partnership with you to bring this webinar, this idea to life. I remember when we were back in my office almost a year ago, like kind of just imagining how we might work together, and then this idea came to fruition. And so I'm just very delighted that, that we've been able to partner the provost office, my area, and our alumni office together to bring this to bring this to light. And then, of course, as we're closing the series for this academic year, I am just so incredibly pleased to have 2 of my dear friends, 2 of our deans at the university, Dean Dayna Cunningham and as well Dean Christina Economos here with us today. Dean Cunningham, as we mentioned, we're not going to put the full bios. We're not going to read the full bios, but they're in the chat box. But I will just say this. Both of our deans, Dean Cunningham and as well Dean Economos, which I will now refer to as Dayna and Chris, are just both such convicted leaders that really lead from their heart, from a sense of passion and moral compass. I am just so delighted to call you friends and partners in this work, and just so incredibly pleased by all the incredible work you have done to impact change here at the institution and also in your fields more broadly. Dayna is a civil rights attorney by trade, Dr. Economist, a researcher, and also a Tufts alum. And so I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Eventually, we're also going to speak not only about, of course, your career journeys, how you think about leadership, but also hear a bit of reflection on a shared joint project that you all conspire together to bring our students to the Mississippi Delta to do some immersive research. And so we're going to talk about that later in a moment as an example of collaboration across the university to create opportunities for our students. But before that, I want to start today's conversation with the question I usually end with. But in the spirit of what we're all navigating sort of on a national landscape, as Marianne had mentioned, and then also the direct impacts in higher education and how we're navigating this moment, for you all as deans of schools, I'm curious, how are you in the midst of sort of the unpredictability, these uncharted like sort of time that we're experiencing in higher education, how are you continuing to find joy and how are you restoring as leaders? What are you doing in this moment? I'll start with Dayna and then I'll have Chris go. Yeah.
Great. So, hi, everybody. It's so great to be part of this series, Monroe. Thank you so much for including us. So, for me, it is the very smallest things. So, today I woke up and discovered that there is a nesting pair of mourning doves right outside my window.
Mm.
And I started tiptoeing by because I don't want to disturb them. But just this, we've had these mourning doves right in this area of our house for I don't know, 5 or 6 years. So they're back, and they have a new brood in process. And I saw them this morning, and I just said, "Thank you, thank you for coming back." It was, yeah, thank you for coming back. So that was my joy today.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Dayna. How about you, Chris? How are you restoring? What is bringing you joy in this moment? Yeah.
Well, interestingly, I was going to answer with nature. So
Mm.
I spend a lot of time when I'm not working trying to be outside in nature. Fortunately, where I live, there's a lot of protected land. And this weekend, I saw snakes and turtles and um, gray herons and lots of other things. But being outside and sort of seeing the vastness when you're in a place where you can see the sky and the land moving on, it's just a reminder that there's so much out there and we might feel confined right now by some of the pressures moving in on us, but there's a lot out there to explore in terms of opportunity and letting your mind expand. And so it's important for me to do that, whether it's toward the ocean or toward a meadow or some other protected land that fortunately in this country we do value.
Oh, yeah, no, nature and the beauty of nature reminds us of our, like, our place in the larger society and its perspective giving. So I want a little bit more perspective about your leadership. And so I'm going to ask you to tap your heels and go back to that childhood. I often said, if you really want to understand a leader, understand how they navigated their childhood. And how are they either recovering from it, embracing it, or still making sense of it, right? And so I want to start today's question or conversation with the same question I start every other webinar, including even with Sunil and Caroline, our president and our provost. So, and tell me about your life journey growing up and how has that informed your leadership and how you think about leadership? Were you, Dayna, as a child, were you curious about legal practice growing up, or how did you become an attorney and make that decision to practice civil rights law? And as well, so what was it like growing up? What were your curiosities? So just give us a sense of your journey to now. We'll start with Dayna and then we'll have Chris chime in with the same questions. Yeah. You're on mute, Dayna.
Sorry.
That's fine. 2025. It's still happening. Go ahead, please.
I would say there, maybe this is the best starting point. So my parents were sort of early adapters in the civil rights movement. We integrated a neighborhood when I was 6 years old. And my dad had this idea that there was no more problem with race at all, and we should just embrace this community. And it turns out it wasn't quite like that. Our family had trouble in the neighborhood. In school, we had trouble. So there was a bit of a disjuncture in the narrative that my parents were telling about, equal opportunity and, vast, unbounded possibility, and my daily encounter with, sort of life in this community. And so, I sort of began to feel the disjuncture and began to think about, well, what do you do about that? How do you, it was never my thought that I would just kind of sit by and watch it. So how was I going to be activated to address the unfairness that I was seeing in front of me? So I think that was a starting point.
Thank you. No, I'm curious before I get to Chris, what do you think, why do you think your parents said, no, we're fine? Because I wonder sometimes if parents are trying to protect us from what they've had to already experience, right? And I know I see a lot of this in South Africa, kind of post-apartheid, the work I've done there, kind of disremembering and trying to protect their children from that. So tell me about that. What do you think was going on for your parents? Yeah.
I actually think it's a common sort of immigrant story, if I can use that frame, that you don't want to talk about the old country because you're in a new country and you think it's going to be different. And so I think my parents absorbed some of that. And I think they believed by the time we were old enough to notice, things really would change. And I love that about them. I love that optimism. It made me inherently an optimistic person. I just think they were wrong in terms of the time scale. And so, yeah, they wanted to protect us. My dad used to say, I didn't want you to grow up with a chip on your shoulder. Now, he had a very different story for my sons, which was very interesting. When my sons were born, he had a very different story. It was warn them about everything. But for us, it's going to change any minute now. We're just going to be fine.
Wow. Chris, nutrition, health, well-being.
Yeah.
What's your story? How did you get into this whole thing around nutrition and healthier way of living and being? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Monroe. I think I'll combine my answer with science and community service. So from a young age, I loved science. I went and competed in some science fairs when I was young and got really excited, got, some encouragement from an elementary school science teacher, keep going, keep going. And all the while, my family was very involved in community service. And that was just part of what we did. We rolled up our sleeves and we pitched in and we were, a part of making the community better. And when I think I got to middle school, and this is fairly typical of young women in the late 70s, early 80s, I kind of withdrew a little bit and didn't want to be seen. And so my dream of becoming a doctor didn't disappear, but I think I was nervous about calling attention to myself in a variety of ways. But when I got to college, then I was able to really go again and study pre-med and be more excited about science. And, I wanted also tie in an experiential learning opportunity I had when I was a senior as an undergrad. I spent a semester at Children's Hospital in Boston, which was phenomenal. And I was doing clinical rounds, following them on my path to be a doctor. And they also had a pathologist working for them. And he was in the basement studying the hearts from children with congenital heart disease. And I wanted to be down there. And so these two incredible physicians who actually were married and ran pediatric cardiology at Children's pulled me aside and said, have you ever thought about being a scientist instead of a physician? You seem to be drawn more to the discovery and the science. And it was life-changing for me. So that science bug I had turned into being a doctor because not coming from a family of a lot of scholars with different experiences, I really didn't know what a PhD in science would be able to do. And it wasn't until I found another group of mentors who kind of showed me the way. But the science was there from a very, very young age and, encouraged by my family, but again, more toward, oh, well, then you can be a doctor. So I think, mentoring's been important, encouragement's been important, and then weaving in community service and giving back every step of the way, which has, become a part of the science that I do. So it's, when I look back, it's many different moments that have come together in the choices that I've made. And a lot of it is mentorship, people who took the time to notice, to care, a teacher, a mentor, a parent. And that's all just so important. And I think it's why I ended up in academia, because I get to do that every day.
That's a beautiful segue to that next question I was going to ask about, like, deciding to work in academia, right? I mean, both of you are trained in fields where you could have gone and made a lot of money, as a scientist and researcher, especially in the Boston area, right, in the health space, right? And then Dana, an attorney. You could have been a high-powered, like cutthroat attorney, right? But both of you decided to invest in learning, invest in a possibility of a future for young people. So tell me why. What made you decide to do your work in the academy? And Dana, you often talk about this idea of the North Star, right? And so I'm curious if you see this as your own personal North Star in your work, and why the academy. So tell me a bit about why you decided to lead in that way. And then Chris, similarly, love to hear more. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, the North Star is this aspirational direction. It's like sort of it is in fact a navigational tool, right? Sailors used it, enslaved people escaping north used it. And so for the idea is you're never going to get there. That's not the point. The point, it is directional and aspirational and helps you, sort of head in the direction you need to go in. I had no idea that I was going to end up in academia. I actually thought I was going to be a lawyer for the rest of my life. I loved civil rights law. And what I loved most about it was working with people. And over time, I don't know how explicit this was, but over time, I began to see the need for knowledge and research of kind of the circumstances directly in front of you as important for communities and for therefore training scientists and knowledge seekers. I mean, legal work, litigation is in some ways a form of research. I mean, it is in fact research. You have to, interview, people who can tell you about the circumstances that exist that are related to the claims you're making. And so I became very interested in how you train people in elite places to respect and regard the knowledge and the experience and the theory making of people in their everyday lives. And I should back up and say this. My dad did this thing. He would get the New York Times every Sunday, sit us around the breakfast table. He'd just randomly pick an article and he'd read, the pithy paragraphs and then like point to us. What do you think? Make your argument. So there was this
Socratic method. Yes.
It was no big surprise, that kind of steered me towards law and kind of intellectual inquiry. And then I think the last thing about academia, so first this idea of training people to ask different kinds of questions and to explore, lived experience, but then also students. Students are so amazing, and Tufts students are just an extraordinary group of amazing people, and so every day there is fulfillment and joy in connecting with young people who are hungry and curious. And I know I read about all this stuff about the kind of soaring levels of depression and resignation and all that stuff. But what I see is our students are hungry to do something in the world. They don't want to just sit there and watch problems pile up. And it is just exhilarating. Chris and I found this in I'm speaking for you, Chris, sorry. But, I think when we were in the Mississippi Delta, the curiosity, the hunger, the reverence that our students had for inquiry was so fulfilling, so fulfilling. So that's enough for me.
Thank you. Chris, please. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think back to, my childhood, and it was actually National Geographic, where my dad would say, now read this article about this culture or country or practice, and, what do you think? And we had a lot of discussions about the world. And that really lent itself to a lot of learning about different things, historical things and sociology and sometimes science, because there's a lot of wisdom in indigenous practices, for example. And so that's interesting that you brought that up about sitting around and having that kind of conversation on a regular basis. It matters because you hear your voice is heard and respected, and you start to process things in a different way in a safe space. And not that that doesn't happen in school. It doesn't always. It depends where you grew up and what you were exposed to. And so for me, it was really important. And then having that experience at a teaching hospital, at a Harvard-based hospital, children's, really showed me that academia is, lifelong learning, even for the adults who are in that space. So the joy of everything Dayna said, teaching and mentoring and helping with discovery is a big part of what I love. But I also have evolved as a person through the years with my own science and my own processing of how the world has changed around me. And growing as a person has been incredibly rewarding. I never feel stuck. And I think any of us could go to a talk any day we wanted to on any topic you can imagine as being part of a university like Tufts. And we take advantage of that and are constantly opening our minds and turning things over that were maybe established that we want to challenge a little bit. And doing that in partnership with students, people who are from a different generation and have different ways of seeing the world is just incredibly rewarding. So I didn't think I would end up in academia either. I went to work in public health for a couple of years, and I saw the gap between how knowledge is generated and how it's utilized. And there's a pretty long process that happens, and I wanted to try to shorten that. So having trained for my PhD at Tufts with cutting edge nutrition science, I expected that when I got out there, people were using that within months of discovery. But actually, it takes a long time, and this is true of every field. And I had this desire to go back to academia and try to shorten that by doing translational research. So that's really what led me 25 years ago back to Tufts to do research that I thought was quite translational and could be applied in a fairly short amount of time, and dedicating some of my career and my training of others to impact. So it's been a journey. It sounds like for Dayna too, it wasn't a straight line. And so much of why I am where I am is because of the time I've spent talking to other people. And that could be in a highly intellectual setting, or it could be a walk processing it with someone who understands who I am. So I just really want to point to relationships and with people of all ages, as Dayna said, and we'll talk about our time in Mississippi, decades separated Dayna and I from people who are 19 and 20. And yet I think the reciprocal learning was extraordinary.
Yeah. No, I thank you both for saying that. I mean, two things I want to pick up on. For me, one is this place of like seeing higher education as a place of new knowledge, and you're right on the cusp of it, right? And that excitement that comes where you're like, oh wow. But also this like way in which that learning and knowledge happens with our students, right? And so when you have people working in the academy, some people just want to profess but are not learners, troubling, troubling for me. And then finally, my great grandmother set me at the table, and it would always be one word out of the dictionary, find a new word. And that's why I became an English major as an undergrad. And so that those transformative moments and building those foundations from people that matter in our lives is big. And so thank you for sharing that, both of you. And so I want to get part of the reason why I started this series is also to provide maybe just a peek into the day-to-day, inner workings of a university, and hearing from our leaders in terms of how you navigate your roles and how you lead. And so I did the same with Caroline, our provost, did the same with Sunil, and all of our roles reporting to our provost, Caroline Ginkgo. And so as deans, I would love to just get maybe a quick snapshot of your day-to-day practice. What's a typical day, if there's even one, of a dean? What does a dean do? And how do you lead in the spirit of that? So I'm going to take those next two questions together. So how does that show up in your leadership, your day-to-day? And so we'll start with you, Chris, this time. Kind of give us a quick snapshot, and how does your leadership show up in your day-to-day too? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think about my day every day, including institutional, school level, organizational, and individual meetings and problems and opportunities. So, Dayna and I being deans at the university, we're very involved in the institutional leadership and work closely with Caroline and Sunil and everyone else to lead the university. And that is really exciting because we're really seeing higher ed at a much, I think, bigger level than we do at our own school level. And so that's a big part of what we do and contribute our thinking there. And then organizationally, mine is the Friedman School of Nutrition. And there's a lot to do when you lead a school. There's fundraising, there's research growth, there's educational transformation, there's the student experience, and there's different people working on different aspects of that. And it's, making sure I'm in and out of meetings and applying my leadership to all of those. And then at the kind of individual level, there's the personal growth that I talked about that requires some attention. You're making sure I'm up on science and up on nutrition science and policy. And also I still do some research. So doing my own research requires me to really dip into data and protocols and institutional review boards and things like that. So every day there's, almost every day there's all of that, which makes it really exciting. And then there's a moment to sometimes step out and go to a talk and hear from someone who can inspire, who can enrich my thinking, who can push me to think differently. And so that's the lifelong learner part. So, it consists of meetings, group meetings, leading meetings, listening in meetings, being empathetic, having one-on-one conversations, and of course, solving problems. And just to add a little bit to that, I think my leadership style is very data-driven, and that's my training as a scientist. There's no question. It's impact-oriented, so I want to make sure we're having a lens of how is this going to have impact, and also quite participatory, and that's the type of research I do. So I like to set up different structures so that the people who will be impacted or involved at the school level in my research studies have a voice. And there are very intentional ways of doing that. And it's not just, what do you think? There's lots of different theories that you can apply to adult learning to make sure that people are invested in participating. So I'll just end by saying I try to lead by example too. I think that's important. I don't always do it well, but I try. And I think I just taught a leadership course this past semester, and it was students, PhD and master's students. And I made sure to talk about my mistakes and how I learned from them, but I also made sure to talk about how I try to keep some balance in my life and how that changed at every phase. So, before I do have children, so before I had children, raising my children, now, how do you find time for yourself and balance and opportunities to refuel you as an individual?
Thank you. That's beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, Dayna, what's your life like, right? Are there differences in what Chris has shared, or how would you had a picture for us to understand Dean Cunningham and what you do during the day? Yeah.
So similar buckets of activity during the day. So lots of institution-wide engagement on a number of things. So in addition to sort of deans and presidents meetings, deans and provosts meetings, we are in a moment of transformation at Tufts, and there's Tufts Beyond 175. We're kind of rethinking our business models. So there are all kinds of working groups and committees and different things that also call our attention, all at the level of, what is happening in the space of higher education overall? How does this relate to Tufts' model? What is Tufts' unique value proposition? And then how does that translate at the school level? So all of that is an ongoing conversation. And like Chris, I find it very exciting and exhilarating, even in this moment. There's, for me, I think, I like to think of it as, we can't let a good crisis go to waste. And this is one good crisis we are in now.
For sure.
Yes, right?
We're going to talk more about that in a moment. Absolutely. Yes.
But the question becomes, either you shrink from it, or you think about how to grow through it and prepare for what comes next. How do you build from the rubble? And so I think it's a tremendous period for innovation and rethinking of things, and that's very exciting. And that translates all the way down. We talk about it at the field level and the institutional level. And then at the school level, it is, my task to translate to my staff and, for all of our programming, what does it look like to drill down to the next, to take that intelligence and that strategizing and bring it to the level of our school and how we're going to implement it. How do we think about our student programming? How do we think about our work with faculty? And so that all of that is invention, and it's fun, it's challenging, it's daunting sometimes. It is rethinking the business model is huge for us right now, particularly in the face of all the federal cuts. How do we think about revenue generation? We have new financial models that we're looking at for the whole university and then by school. And that is really challenging. I didn't think I was going to be a small business leader.
Right.
Yeah.
But that is part of the task. And I don't know, Chris talked about personal growth. It's an area of personal growth for me. And who doesn't want to grow? I want to grow. So that's very exciting. We concentrate a lot on experiential learning, co-curricular activity. And we are a unique school in the country, but also at Tufts itself, because we are the only higher education institution in the country solely dedicated to civic life and civic learning. And so that really frames our task as an institution. And for me, it is important to insist across all that we do that our work is guided by an academic discipline called civic studies. It is not just kind of pushing students out the door to pull weeds in a public park or serve soup in a kitchen. It's really asking deeper questions about how does the structure of community life lend itself to building democracy, and how can you strengthen that? And what is the intersection between individual agency and institutional power? And, there's a whole set of theoretical and applied theoretical and philosophical questions that come into play if you are talking about cultivating civic character. We are so lucky at Tufts that this is in our DNA to think about civic character. This goes back to the Unitarians. And it's a very thick part of Tufts culture. I have to say, when I took this job, I really liked the idea of leading a school of civic life, but I had no idea the degree to which civic life, civic learning, civic duty, civic character would be a part of the day-to-day operation of the whole university. And that's been a really exciting thing, thinking of how do you really weave that through. And then the last thing I would say is in this, we are in a strategic process at the university level, also at our school level. Working through all of that in a time of crisis requires, I think, much more transparency than we've had in the past, than we've needed in the past. And it's because, in these moments of crisis, first of all, you want your team to know that you are paying attention and responding and taking care of them and the problems and our students. And then you really want their input in how best to resolve problems, because everybody has a different viewpoint. Everybody from the staff who are working directly day to day with students to the administrative units who are thinking about local procurement and what's happening at the level of local procurement. So, so transparency and communication becomes more important than it ever has been.
Thank you. No, that's a perfect segue to this next major question I want to ask before I get into some of the work you all are doing in the Mississippi Delta. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, right? Literally Tufts, right? In that we're navigating a really complicated time in higher education right now, where I think that the real core of what does it mean to be a university in the mission of developing new leaders through research and through learning and education and practice. And over the last 5 years, it's been a journey, right? This is not just something that just happened overnight in some ways. And so I am curious from both of your perspectives as leaders in higher education, what do you think the long-term implications of this moment will be on us in higher education? And Dayna, you started to talk about what some of the new process we're going to need as leaders as we go forward in order to survive in higher ed. But I'm just curious, Chris, if you have more thoughts about that too. So I want to start with you, Chris. What's your analysis of how we're what's happening now in higher education? And then as you think about leadership going forward, what do you think is going to be needed in higher education? How do we need to respond to this and do things maybe differently? What's your thought?
Sure. Yeah, so in the educational space, I think there are a couple key things that I've been working on, as many others have been, and that's to make a Tufts education or higher education more accessible, affordable, and flexible. We need to meet people where they are. And for example, we just launched an online degree, and we're seeing incredible uptake from people who are working, who are all over, who can't come and live in Boston for a couple of years to get a degree. And we want to meet them. We want them to participate. So we want it to be global. We want it to be accessible to people who historically couldn't access a Tufts education. And the way we're going to have real world impact in health and nutrition is to train people from all different backgrounds. So that's in the educational space. The other part of it that's really important to us is research growth. And there are some challenges right now. We get a lot of money from federal agencies, and we want to be more innovative in public-private partnerships. And those will require, as they always have, a set of guiding principles, making sure that both sides are protected, and trying to really figure out how we bring two sectors together to advance science. And there's a lot more we need to do there. The other area within innovation is to get the information out there so it's usable immediately. We publish peer-reviewed papers, we inform policy, that's all really important, but we need to be doing even more. And that is starting organizations, spinning off companies, spinning off B Corps or not-for-profit organizations that we can then launch and go out into the world and do good. So there's a lot of innovation that we need to really be thinking about, and those are more complex funding models. They really require, legal thinking. And the last thing I'll say is our international playground. I'm working on a couple of really exciting international things where there's an interest in partnering with us and sending students back and forth and faculty and bringing our cutting edge research and education to different areas of the world, adapting it, modifying it for different cultures. So we're doing a lot more of that. And those are things we've always done as a university. We've been a global thinking body of scholars, but we're going to do more of that. So I'm really excited about, the year ahead. And I'll give you one quick example. I meant to say my day also consists of leaving the walls of the academy. So I'm out in the field a lot and learning by going on site visits and talking to people and seeing how things are done. I was on Capitol Hill this year. I've eaten school lunch with kids in Boston Public Schools. There's a lot you learn by being somewhere. And I'm going to go, this month actually to Saudi Arabia and hopefully tour some of the hydroponics systems there, which is really cool because we need to feed the world. And in the next 30 years, it's going to be a lot more people and a lot more risk to our production. So how are we going to do that? By using science and technology. So there's an example of going and touring and being there and thinking about research questions with nutrient density and how do we get our students involved and, what is the climate modeling we can do to work together to ensure that production is high across the world. So just wanted to give you those examples.
Thank you, Chris, for that. And yeah, Dayna, what do you think about this moment? And you started to talk a lot about that, but anything more you wanted to add about how you're responding? Actually, I'm curious to hear from you, Dayna, if I can. How do you think our students are experiencing this moment?
I was going to talk about that.
Yeah, that's what I would. Yeah.
So let's see. So let me say this first. Sunil has put to us the task of completely rethinking how we deliver education. And I think everything is on the table in that regard. And we know, sort of from the Tisch perspective, what we really focus on is experiential learning. And so I think it's a great opportunity to figure out how we weave through the curriculum across the university and become a kind of platform for engaged learning for our students. And that means connecting with faculty in different ways. This will be the segue in part into Chris and I doing the Mississippi thing together, because we had been having this sort of conversation, and then it was like, boop, what's the idea, right? So how do you structure that kind of experience, and how do you do it in an academically rigorous way? And how do you create learning tools and methods that can really help students have the experience, learn how to create knowledge with communities, not just harvest knowledge from communities, and in the process, develop their own civic character and we call it civic pathways, a pathway for meaningful, lifelong civic engagement. So all of that wrapped into the curriculum as you're thinking through, what are the new business models? How do you think, Chris has talked a lot about lifelong learning. How do you think about engaging new communities that have not been involved in higher education or have not found higher education accessible? And are there ways through lifelong learning, through partnerships for us with University College, which is our lifelong learning school, to design programs that for us do three things. One, expand the idea of who it is to become who can be a Tufts student. Build civic capacity in the communities that we are working in or that we are approaching for the purposes of these kinds of lifelong learning experiences, and also generate revenue. So three distinct
Money matters. Yes, yes.
Money matters. And
yeah.
But we do think there is an appetite. We're looking, we found out we're doing lifelong learning programming with the Chamber of Commerce in Medford. And we found out there's an abundance of dentists who want more community engagement training. I don't know why, but I'm thrilled to find that out. And I'm thrilled to create curricula and sort of modules and micro credentials that can help them build their civic capacity, and through learning at Tufts. So that is a really big piece. I will say that I think our students, relatively speaking, are quite resilient, and I don't want to be that person who's like, don't worry about it, they're not suffering, they're resilient. I think our students are suffering. I think it's a very tense and frightening time. Our graduate student, Remisa Ozturk, being snatched off the street sent a chill across our entire community and just created a sense of moral injury. I would say that was pretty deep. I would say that Sunil's leadership in responding to that has really helped our community. And so it's an example of how much leadership in crisis really, really matters, not just in terms of like preserving institutional resilience, but in terms of morale and sense of community. And Tufts is a community of people who care about citizenship, who care about public good, and the moral injury, just a little salve on the moral injury that we could do something to support the student, I think really helped. So we lean into joy in these situations. We have, we call de-stress fests. And we just open up the doors and we invite the dogs,
comfort dogs,
the
yes.
comfort dogs. And we have cupcakes and puzzles and crayons, and people are on the floor and just doing crafts and stuff. And that, I think, really helps. We had a Barnum, our building is Barnum. We had a Barnum block party, and we had everybody in Barnum come to one central space. And we learned about some of the programs that are in this building that we didn't even know about, and colleagues, we made connections. So for our students, I think it is very close attention to giving them spaces for joy, and then supporting them for things like, do you need more time for your exams because, you know, you were one of the students who wrote the op-ed, you know,
Yep.
or, you know, do you just need a space where you feel safe and, you know, because you think there's been an ICE raid and, you know, we'll order pizza.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then it is also, can we bring, so we have a speaker series and we bring a huge diversity of speakers across the ideological spectrum. And do you want to debate some of the questions about, like, what do you think about Project 2025 and what are the strengths of it, and how might you explain the theory behind it, but also what are the impacts of it? And so I think it's really important for students to have both the community building
Yes.
and the theoretical academic spaces to reason through what should we do in this moment. It's a moral character question. It's a philosophical question. It's a citizenship question. What should we do in this moment? So all of that, you know, we are responsible for all of those dimensions of our students' development.
Absolutely. So, and I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is that we're going to have to help students see themselves as leaders again. Because of what we just saw with our own student election, the lowest turnout in many, many years in terms of students running for our student senate, and our president uncontested, right? In terms of, which is great. I think he's going to be great. But I think that says a lot about students wanting to take up this leadership role at this time and what that means in making them vulnerable, right? And so that's another whole conversation. Chris, like you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to jump in and build on what Dayna was saying. I think also as a leader, it's really important to pick up on signs and signals in the community that you're leading. And, you know, we've had spontaneous listening sessions, town halls. I do coffee with the dean. I have one tomorrow. Open my door and just listen and talk. And I think there's a lot of time that's been invested because of the signals that we're getting, that some people need data. They want to know what's going on, you know, tell us about, you know, the federal grants and immigration and my visa. Some people want data and some people just want space to be held for how they're experiencing the moment and how they're feeling, and to be in community. And I think all of it's important. One size doesn't fit all. And being a perceptive leader who can kind of try to figure out, how do I insert all of these things into my community, is really important. These are human beings that we're bringing into our space and assuring them that we are helping hold them through this. And so I just wanted to add that I think that's part of the leadership in crisis, is knowing, you know, when to plan something, who to engage, how to reach out to the community, et cetera. And it's been ongoing and really for the last couple of years for a variety of reasons.
If I could just add one thing to that. Right after October 7th, our students and staff just wanted to be in spaces together. They didn't want to talk about problems. They didn't want to solve anything. They didn't want to debate anything. They just wanted, and we had one session where it was mainly silence. And we just sat together in the space to just witness each other and, you know, sort of empathetically hold this space for each other and just kind of hold the pain. So, you know, it's unusual in an academic space for there to be no discourse, but that's what was needed. It was what Chris was saying about paying attention to that moment and to the needs, to the signals that we're getting from our people.
So the challenge in these conversations, the time goes by so fast. So we have a few moments left, and I want to ensure people hear about the Mississippi Delta and the experiences our students had. I had the opportunity to hear a panel of the students during your advisory board dinner, Dayna, and Chris was there as well. And so give us, like, you know, part of like what you're saying, responding to what's needed in the moment, thinking about a vision of what we want to see in the future and going about making it happen, right? And so the two of you have done that, building on Chris's research, right, in the Delta. And so give us, maybe Chris, you can kind of give us, like, you know, sort of an overview of the experience and your research in that space, and why you and Tisch decided to partner to give students that experience. We have about 2 minutes left.
Sure. So this is a large randomized controlled trial happening in the Mississippi Delta to improve health, particularly lower diabetes risk and reduce obesity. And it's interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary. So it involves healthcare, it involves people on the ground working on a food policy council, it involves agriculture. So there are many aspects to learn from. And so it's a perfect project to bring students into the space to experience the interdisciplinary nature of it and to see the different investigators who are on it. And the connection, of course, with Dayna that she'll talk about is it involves engagement. So even the investigators on the project are going back and forth, being in space with the people doing the work, whether it's Black farmers or physicians or community advocates.
Mm.
And I think what Tisch was also bringing, and I'll hand it over to Dayna, was the way you experience an opportunity like we gave them. So it's not just a site visit somewhere where you might think about it for a little bit. This was deep engagement and learning with daily reflection. And so doing that for a week is really different than doing that for a day. And so we wanted for it to be an experience that could be transformative. And the only way it could is if Dayna was applying the theory that she described. So the experience was, much more than just, oh, I saw that and maybe I'll tell someone about it, but how am I internalizing that? And how does that align with my North Star and the disciplines that I'm studying at Tufts and the making of myself that's happening during these critical years? So I'll let Dayna talk about what she and Tisch brought, which was really different and exceptional.
Yes, please,
So,
Dayna.
yeah, I would just add that we were immersed in a place that has a long history of social movements, and an important lesson for would-be researchers that Chris models really beautifully is you're not inventing anything from scratch. You are intervening in a historical process, and your work becomes more impactful if you really understand the historical process that you are engaged in. And so part of the co-creation that Chris and I did was we worked to bring both the history and the social dimension as well as the science day after day. So our students got both of that. And so for our students, they learned what does a food census going to local grocery stores have to do with the history of farming. And, this is an area, one of the most fertile agricultural areas in the world, and there's no human food being grown. So what is that contradiction about? How did that happen? Why does it still exist? How is this project trying to intervene in it? Who are the leaders and how were they inspired to try against all odds to do this ridiculous thing, to go up against big agro, And so, yeah, I would say that putting all that together in the name of better understanding research, thinking hard about impact, learning from people who you might never otherwise encounter, and then being really inspired by all of these leaders and their North Star vision, and what it means for your work going forward.
And we had 20 students, 10 undergrad and 10 graduate students, and who'd never met before. But to see them at Logan Airport all saying their goodbyes was pretty incredible after spending a week together. And many connections were made and are now blossoming because of it. So it was really great.
Yeah, and lastly, turn it over to Sean. I see Sean's there waiting to kind of give us the put a bow on the gift today. But so last question, if our alumni want to support student engaged, like community participatory research, what is the first step they can do to help support these efforts? Just to bring it back home to our alumni community or parents. Yeah. What might be one thing they can do to support that effort in your schools? Yeah. We don't mind, but that, yeah.
Look, I think both Chris and I support research in our schools that is participatory and engaged and longitudinal, which is another really important part. And so, supporting that kind of research in our schools is as simple as making a donation, or if you've got a really interesting problem somewhere that may touch on nutrition or on, community engaged research somewhere, or a community that is really looking for support, a conversation about what that could look like. We want to stay in Mississippi. Chris and I want to continue working together in Mississippi. And so support for our work in Mississippi would be absolutely extraordinary. I'll turn it over to Chris.
Yeah, and I mean, there obviously are ways to make donations towards student scholarships, student internships, all of that. But there's also talent and time where, we have advisors who are on either boards or who are part of, I have a Tufts Nutrition Council that gets together a couple times a year. These are people who are friends of the Friedman School, interested in the space. Sometimes it's a connection they make for me, or words of wisdom, a talent that they have that they can introduce a student to. So it's so much more than a donation, but that's obviously a part of it as well. But I would say it's, talent, time, and funding. They're all important. And anyone who's affiliated with Tufts, is often excited to get involved and to help students. And those things all matter.
Thank you. Well, Dayna, Chris, I am so appreciative of your leadership and to call you friends and colleagues. Thank you for the incredible work you do in terms of helping Tufts remember its North Star in the world. I appreciate both of you. I'm going to turn it back over to Sean to close us out for this season and to close us out for today.
Monroe, thank you so much. My name is Sean Devendorf, Executive Director of Alumni Engagement and Annual Giving. Just thank you so much to Dean Cunningham and Dean Economos for joining us today, sharing your stories, your thoughts on leadership. We're just so grateful for your time and expertise. It's such a testament to what you bring to Tufts and the energy and enthusiasm. It's just energizing to hear your stories and visions of leadership. And a jumbo thank you to Monroe France and Marianne Hunt. They've created this series of webinars to help us provide more insight into the joys and challenges of leadership in higher education, and specifically here at Tufts. And thank you for attending. This was the 6th and final webinar in this series, but there are plenty of opportunities to continue learning. All of these recordings will be on the Tufts Alumni YouTube channel. Bookmark it, take a look at it, and find other great content there. And if you want to keep learning with Monroe, there is an incredible Tufts Travel Learn trip to Ghana that he is leading in April 2026. So we put the link in the chat for that. But just most importantly, thank you for being here. You'll be taken to a short survey when you leave this webinar. Please share your feedback with us. We want to know what you're looking for, how we can continue to engage you, and what you want to attend. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you again to our speakers and our hosts, and just have a great day. Thank you very much.